Killing a leader is a tactical decision measured in hours. The economic consequences of collapsing the state that leader commanded are measured in decades. On February 28, 2026, a joint U.S.-Israeli operation eliminated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader of 36 years, along with the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Iranian defense minister, the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, and between 5 and 10 additional senior officials who were gathered in a single Tehran compound. Iranian state media confirmed the deaths and declared 40 days of national mourning. By Sunday morning, the Assembly of Experts, the 88-member clerical body constitutionally responsible for selecting a new supreme leader, had no confirmed quorum, no agreed candidate, and no secure location from which to convene. The most senior civilian official confirmed alive was Ali Larijani, former parliament speaker and longtime Khamenei confidant, who posted a vow of retaliation on social media from an undisclosed location. What markets opened to on Monday was not a war between two governments. It was something structurally different and economically far more complex. A nation of 93 million people, sitting on 10% of the world's proven oil reserves, directly adjacent to the world's most critical energy chokepoint, with no functioning central authority and a military apparatus whose command and control architecture had just been severed at its highest levels. You can negotiate with a hostile government. You cannot negotiate with a power vacuum. And financial markets, which price uncertainty with ruthless efficiency, had to assign a number to the abyss. The economic architecture driving these historic ruptures operates through mechanisms that most coverage completely misses. The infrastructure of power, not just its collapse. Subscribing to this channel means staying positioned ahead of that analysis, not catching up to it after markets have already moved. Now, here's the precise economic anatomy of what a leaderless Iran means for energy markets, the IRGC's $100 billion domestic empire, and China's suddenly catastrophic energy exposure. The first layer of economic consequence is the one markets priced within the first hour of Asian trading, the immediate oil supply signal. Iran's pre-strike oil production was approximately 3.2 million barrels per day, with sanctioned exports running between 1.4 and 1.7 million barrels per day, the overwhelming majority absorbed by Chinese state refineries at significant discounts to benchmark prices. Under normal political conditions, even hostile ones, Iranian oil production continues because the state apparatus that manages it has clear institutional interests in maintaining revenue. A functioning government, however adversarial, has a budget to finance, salaries to pay, and a population to manage. Those requirements create a continuous incentive to keep the oil flowing regardless of political tension with the outside world. A power vacuum has none of those institutional constraints. What it has instead are competing factions, each of which controls pieces of the production and export infrastructure, none of which has the authority to make binding commitments about access or continuity, and all of which have incentives to weaponize control over oil infrastructure as leverage in the internal succession struggle. The historical template for this dynamic is Libya in 2011. Within 2 weeks of the Gaddafi government losing effective control, Libyan oil production collapsed from 1.6 million barrels per day to under 200,000. Not because the infrastructure was destroyed, most of it was intact, but because the legal and political framework within which production and export contracts functioned had dissolved, and no international counterparty could enter into enforceable agreements with an entity that could not demonstrate sovereign authority. Iran's situation in March 2026 is structurally analogous, with one critical difference that makes it significantly more complex: the IRGC. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not simply Iran's most powerful military institution. It is the country's largest economic conglomerate, and understanding what happens to that conglomerate in a leadership vacuum is essential to understanding the full scope of the market disruption. According to documented assessments from the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, the RAND Corporation's published analysis, and independent Iranian economic research, the IRGC controls between 25 and 50% of Iran's total GDP through a structure of subsidiaries, foundations, no-bid government contracts, and parastatal holding companies. Iran's GDP was approximately $437 billion in 2024, according to World Bank data. That means the IRGC's economic empire represents somewhere between $110 billion and $220 billion in productive assets. Construction, telecommunications, petrochemicals, ports, banking, agriculture, and critically significant portions of the oil and gas extraction and export infrastructure. The centerpiece of this empire is Khatam Al-Anbiya Construction Headquarters, an IRGC-controlled engineering and construction conglomerate that the U.S. Treasury has designated as a sanctions target. describing it as controlling hundreds of subsidiary companies across oil, gas, pipeline construction, and major infrastructure. In the 2025 Iranian budget, the Majlis formally allocated 51% of all oil and gas export revenues to the IRGC and the Law Enforcement Command. This was not a shadow arrangement. It was written into the national budget, which creates the central economic question of the post-strike environment. In the absence of a supreme leader who functioned as the ultimate authorizing authority for IRGC economic activity, who controls Katam, they can only price it with a premium so large that it effectively removes the asset class from normal commercial calculation. The second layer of consequence operates at the level of contract law and international commercial relationships, and this layer is where the disruption extends far beyond Iran's borders into the supply chains of its trading partners. Every international energy contract involving Iranian production, and there are hundreds of them, operating through the gray market structures that China, India, and other importers have developed to access sanctioned Iranian oil, is structured around a counterparty that can demonstrate sovereign authority. Even in the heavily obfuscated world of sanctions evasion trade, where Iranian crude moves through ship-to-ship transfers, false flag registrations, and intermediary jurisdictions, the underlying commercial logic requires someone to guarantee delivery, accept payment, and maintain the infrastructure through which the commodity moves. In a power vacuum, that guarantee is worthless because no entity can demonstrate the authority to make it binding. The immediate commercial consequence is that every gray market Iranian supply arrangement becomes unenforceable overnight. Not because the oil disappears, but because the institutional framework that made the trade possible, however informally, has dissolved. This is where China's exposure becomes the third and most economically significant layer of the power vacuum premium. China has been the primary absorber of Iranian-sanctioned oil exports since the reimposition of U.S. maximum pressure sanctions. According to trade flow analysis published by Vortexa, Kepler, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Chinese state refineries were importing between 800,000 and 1.2 million barrels per day of Iranian crude as of late 2025, purchased at discounts of $10 to $15 per barrel below the prevailing Brent benchmark price. That discount represented an annual subsidy to Chinese industrial competitiveness of approximately $4 to $7 billion, embedded in the cost structure of every Chinese product whose production involves energy inputs. That discount is now gone, not because China chose to stop buying, but because there is no functioning Iranian state entity capable of guaranteeing supply continuity, processing payment, and maintaining the production and loading infrastructure through which that oil moved. China's energy exposure to Iran extends beyond crude oil imports. Under the 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement signed in March 2021, China committed to investing approximately $400 billion in Iranian infrastructure over the agreement's duration, in exchange for priority access to Iranian energy resources at preferential prices. The Belt and Road investments in Iran span rail connections linking the Persian Gulf to Central Asia, port development at Bandar Abbas and Chabahar, and petrochemical joint ventures that were designed to integrate Iranian production capacity into Chinese industrial supply chains. As of the strike, Chinese state enterprises had committed and partially dispersed capital across these projects that the Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated at between $15 and $20 billion in deployed investment. The counterparty to every one of those investment agreements was the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, a legal entity whose institutional continuity is now in genuine question. Chinese legal frameworks for sovereign investment assume a functioning state on the other side of the agreement. They do not have established protocols for continuing infrastructure investment in a country where the sovereign authority it is a forced recalculation of energy security assumptions that Chinese industrial planning has been built around for years. The discounted Iranian supply that buffered China against global oil price volatility must now be replaced at market rates from alternative suppliers, primarily Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, and Russia, none of whom can offer the combination of volume, discount, and political flexibility that the Iranian arrangement provided. The incremental cost to China of replacing Iranian discounted supply at market prices across the volume it was importing is approximately $4 to $7 billion per year at current price differentials. That figure moves directly into Chinese industrial cost structures and ultimately into the pricing of Chinese exports, a supply-side inflationary signal that propagates through global manufacturing supply chains. The fourth layer of the power vacuum premium is the one that is most difficult to price and most consequential in the long run, the Strait of Hormuz command question. Before the strike, IRGC Navy units responsible for strait operations, the fast attack craft, the mining assets, the coastal missile batteries, operate under a clear command hierarchy that terminated in the supreme leader's authority. That hierarchy provided a de facto deterrent structure. Iranian military action in the Strait was constrained by the political calculus of a leadership that, however hostile, was making rational cost-benefit assessments about escalation. In a command and control vacuum, those constraints dissolve. Individual IRGC naval commanders, operating without clear authorization chains, face a situation where the institutional reward structure for restraint has disappeared along with the leadership that defined it, while the institutional culture of the IRGC, which the organization's own stated doctrine frames around martyrdom and sacrifice, creates internal pressure toward action rather than restraint. This is precisely the scenario that insurance underwriters find impossible to price with actuarial precision. Risk models for hostile but rational state actors are well developed. Risk models for fragmented military commands, operating in an ideological framework that explicitly valorizes sacrifice, do not exist in any established actuarial literature. The absence of a priceable model means underwriters default to the maximum available premium or withdraw coverage entirely. Lloyd's Joint War Committee designation for the Persian Gulf, which was already active before the strike, becomes functionally restrictive under these conditions. Not merely expensive, but potentially unavailable at any price for some vessel categories and routing configurations. When insurance becomes unavailable rather than merely expensive, the economic effect is equivalent to physical closure of the waterway, even if the waterway remains physically navigable. No commercial operator will transit a route for which insurance cannot be obtained at any price, regardless of the actual navigational conditions. The conclusion that emerges from mapping these four layers, the production fragmentation signal, the contract law dissolution, the Chinese energy exposure, and the insurance market failure, is not that the strike was a strategic miscalculation. The strategic logic of eliminating Iran's command structure is a separate analytical question with its own inputs. The economic conclusion is narrower and more precise. The cost of containing the consequences of the resulting power vacuum was not factored into the operational decision in any publicly visible way. The strike was planned, executed, and publicly celebrated as a tactical success. The economic containment of the state collapse it produced will require a functioning successor government in Tehran, credible reconstruction of IRGC command authority under new civilian oversight, restoration of international counterparty recognition for Iranian commercial entities, and a sustained diplomatic architecture capable of managing Chinese investment claims, a process for which Libya, the most comparable modern precedent, suggests a timeline measured not in months, but in years. Libya's oil production has still not consistently recovered to pre-2011 levels, 15 years after the initial collapse. Iran's production base is 3 times larger, its IRGC economic empire is orders of magnitude more complex, and its position at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz means that the cost of the recovery process falls not merely on Iran and its immediate trading partners, but on every economy whose energy supply transits those 21 miles. The decapitation took hours. The bill for what happens next will be measured in trillions, and that bill does not wait for a successor to be named, a new government to be recognized, or a ceasefire to be negotiated. It starts accruing at market open on Monday morning in every crude futures contract, every shipping insurance renewal, every Chinese refinery procurement desk that is now calculating what Iranian oil at market prices costs versus what it has been paying. The power vacuum premium is not a temporary spike that mean reverts when the dust settles. It is a structural repricing of a node in the global energy system that has been operating under the assumption of, however hostile, a coherent state. That assumption no longer holds. And markets that were pricing Iranian risk as a known quantity now have to price it as an unknown one. The difference between those two numbers is the most consequential economic variable in global energy markets today.